Hello again, everybody. And we're going to be wrapping up 7.5 by looking at the last two theories, which would be dependency theory and commodity dependence. And you can see with the images the difference here. So this is dependency theory. This is commodity dependence. So dependency theory, we want to figure out what it is, first of all. So it's a theory that the periphery is poor, so that'd be this person represented by this cartoon here, because it was economically dependent on the core in a disadvantageous relationship originally established under colonialism and imperialism. And you guys should remember that by now, right? Like that we're talking about colonialism in a lot of different units, and its impact is something that we see in modern day economies in a very, very large way. And it's this idea that the periphery is poor because the core made them poor and kept them there. The developed countries developed because of the failure of some this theory developed because of some countries not developing the way that they were predicted to. And the blame for the lack of development is placed on the core countries that have exploited the periphery and made the periphery dependent on them for jobs, investments, aid, revenue, trade partnerships, all that kind of stuff. And that's why you get this cartoon here that is showing the poor nations feeding the rich nations, because while they are very undernourished and the rich are very overnourished. And that's that idea that like this is an unequal relationship and that the poor nations are reliant on the rich nations, but they're the ones kind of feeding the rich nations at the same time. The periphery used to supply the raw materials needed to the core in order for them to be able to manufacture goods, which were then sold back to the periphery. And this is when the core was a colonizer. It intentionally stunted the growth of those colonies, like we discussed in 7.1. Initially, it was based on trade relationships and later developed to look at the revenue being produced in periphery countries, which would often be funneled back to the core through investments in transnational corporations that were taking advantage of the cheaper labor and lack of labor and environmental restrictions. And those wanting to help the periphery suggested breaking with the core, like finding a way for those peripheral countries to kind of have a breakup with the core countries and like change that relationship so that it wasn't so negative or, in some ways kind of economically abusive towards the periphery. However, the criticisms of this theory is that it pays, at least the critics are saying that it pays too little attention to the cultural and social differences between countries that could influence the economic development that's going on. And they also say that breaking or delinking between the core and the periphery is too difficult to do in an interdependent economic system like our current world economy. And so they think that that's just not realistic. And which is kind of a bummer because it sort of implies that like, no, well, the periphery countries are just going to stay that way, which is really not the goal. So we have the last theory, which would be commodity dependence. When we're talking about commodity dependence, this is when a country's economy is dependent on exporting commodities, meaning that more than 60% of the total exports in a country are commodities. And commodities are primarily agricultural products or raw materials that are bought, sold, and traded, generally without being modified much from their original state. And you guys might remember that this leads to this overdependence, like we talked about in Unit 5 with specifically agricultural products. We see this happening in developing countries a lot, where they are reliant on those commodities for the majority of their economy. But commodity prices are really not stable. They fluctuate a lot with supply and demand, and their overall prices decrease with time, which makes it very difficult to build a stable economy on that kind of system. And this ties to dependency theory in the sense that relationship between the core and the periphery has led to a commodity dependence as well as dependence between those two kind of levels of countries. All right, so that is it for the theories of dependence. If you have any questions or you want me to clarify anything, please do not hesitate to ask. Remember that I'm here to clarify and here to help as you need it. All right, kiddos, I will see you later. Have a good rest of your day. Ask questions. Bye.